So, Paula, the day began, as you know, with Manafort and Gates being indicted. Then we learned that this low level, at least that's what the White House is saying, foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos had already pled guilty. Explain why the news about Papadopoulos may be more significant going forward.
It's incredibly significant. This was a bombshell yesterday. No one really had Papadopoulos on their radar. And what's so incredibly significant is not only has he been charged, he has copped a plea deal. He has agreed to cooperate in exchange for dropping some of those charges. And he was arrested several months ago. These charges have been under seal for several months, which suggests that he has also been cooperating for several months when no one knew.
Paula, I also want to ask you about the president's tweet this morning saying that few people knew the young, low-level volunteer named George. You can debate whether or not he was low-level, whether or not few people knew him. But what about the president continuing to weigh in on this case on Twitter? What are the dangers of him doing so?
Well, let's look at previous cases where the president's tweets have been used against him in a court of law. Let's look at the travel ban, for example. Part of why he has repeatedly had that policy held up in the federal courts is because the judges have looked at his tweets. They have considered those official statements of his and the White House and applied them next to policy and other legal issues. And it has caused him a lot of problems. Part of why the travel ban was blocked, because they took that policy in context with his tweets and they said, look, I think even though you're trying to tell me this policy is about one thing, the president is personally telling me it's about another, and that he would have gone even further. So the travel ban is a perfect example of why, especially when it comes to legal issues, things that are working their way through the courts, it can be dangerous for the president to tweet.
So, Paula, Papadopoulos accepts this plea deal, and according to the FBI, he is a, quote, proactive cooperator in this investigation. A lot of people have honed in on that phrase. What does that exactly mean to you?
It can mean a lot of different things. Some people have speculated that that means he wore a wire. But at this point, that is purely speculative. I have no sources confirming that. But we know that he is a cooperator, and we know that he was arrested several months ago. So for several months, he was working with the special counsel, and no one knew that. And the fact that he was cooperating is a much bigger problem for anyone related to this campaign with something to hide. Because in an age of electronic communications, you don't need a wire to capture communication between people that could be problematic in a criminal way.
So does that make it significant that he was arrested in July, but we're only just finding out about his plea now?
Absolutely. It's significant for two reasons. One, because a lot of people, he just wasn't on their radar and no one knew that he was cooperating. So if anyone was communicating with him, perhaps they weren't as careful as they might have been otherwise. But it also caught us by surprise. A lot of the information about what was coming on Monday had already leaked, but the Papadopoulos and the charges, that caught us completely by surprise, which raises the questions, what other surprises does Robert Mueller have? Who else could he potentially have charged and been working with under seal? It's something that should make anyone who has something to hide very nervous.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Paula, because as you point out, no one really heard much about George Papadopoulos until we learned that he had pled guilty. It does suggest that Robert Mueller is running a very tight ship. There's been a lot of speculation about leaks in the investigation. This was not leaked. We only found out about it, including the President of the United States yesterday. So does that suggest to you that there's a lot more that Robert Mueller is working with that we don't know about?
Absolutely. And I think look at yesterday's choreography. This news came out of this courthouse. It sort of built up anticipation over both days this weekend. And then yesterday, cameras were lining the sidewalk as Manafort went into the Washington field office to turn himself in. When he arrived here at court, we were all there to capture that image, which of course sends a message. Then we got a press release. We haven't gotten any press releases from special counsel. We got several press releases with an indictment of the first two for Manafort and Gates. And just as we were getting through the most salacious details of those indictments, we got this bombshell out of Chicago that he has a cooperating witness who worked on the campaign. But before we credit him with being too masterful in how he's handling this, we also have to remember that being too public about things like this and trying too hard to control the message, that is exactly what got former FBI Director James Comey in trouble with the Clinton email investigation.
All right, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Paula Reid in Washington, thank you so much, Paula.